got my laces tied. My trusty podcast by my side. If you wanna talk fun, it's the place to be. Yeah, it's the drop, D-R-O-P.
All right, today we are here with Michael Doughty, founder of Hylo Athletics. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Robbe.
Yeah, so let's see, where can we start? Right now there's a lot of running shoe brands. I feel like in the last 5 years especially, there's been a lot of startups or more so in the apparel space, but there's definitely been a handful of running shoe startups outside of, the major brands. So, and Hylo has been one of them. And so I wanted to, before we get into the shoe and the models and the process and the manufacturing, I do want to ask you, why start a running shoe brand?
The only honest, I get obviously asked that question quite a lot, and the only honest answer I can really give is naivety.
That's a good one.
I think, truth be told, if I had known the journey it would be to just be sat here talking to you today, I probably never would have started.
Nice.
Just because it has been like brutal in terms of, the things we've had to go through and the challenges, and I think we, just in a good way, just drastically underestimated the size of the challenge. But like now I'm sat here and we're sort of still, building, and we've obviously learned a lot from our mistakes and experiences. I've become just like quite obsessed by so many different like components of what we do and get to do. And I think, personally in my history, movement, whether that be football and now running, has just been, the singular thread kind of in my life that's, continues to keep me happy and sane and feeling and feeling like a human. So, I do, whilst it's really hard, I do feel like lucky that I get to participate in that through the work that I get to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do feel like anything worth value should be hard. I mean, it should be a challenge. I feel like that's the greatest reward. Most reward comes from things that are challenging. So I'm sure you're experiencing that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think probably being a former athlete and a professional football player, you can translate to soccer, but I have a bit of a ban on the word.
That's okay. That's okay.
But
we'll say it once. That's it.
We'll say it once. But when I say football on this podcast, I mean soccer for all the Americans. But since I moved over here, my daughter started saying soccer, so I'm like, it's really frazzling my brain.
Oh no!
I know. My culture's being eroded. But yeah, I think being in that world is probably the most. If you were to, outside of just being a footwear specialist, which would have helped for sure avoid some mistakes, but outside of actually having that backdrop and that grounding, being a professional athlete, and particularly football in the UK, where every kid's dream is to try and make a career in that. I think that's probably been the one fortunate life experience, quite big life experience that I've had, that has kind of prepared me for the size of this challenge. Because essentially you're being told most weeks that you're not good enough or that you need to get better. You have fans, quite sort of clear with their criticisms, and you have to learn to kind of, I guess, keep moving forward. And I think, building a running shoe company and building shoes, you have to be quite, aware of your surroundings, but also quite blinkered at the same time, and quite, I would say, determined with what your vision is, and hope that you can execute against it.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go back a little bit, since you have mentioned your previous life, I guess. So where did you grow up in the UK?
Yes.
Or is that where you're originally from? Okay.
Yeah. So I'm from London. My family kind of history was up north, so in the Midlands, which I think probably kind of akin to the Midwest, basically. And then my
Okay.
parents moved to London in I think the 70s or 80s, so I grew up as a Londoner, but feel a little bit more aligned with sort of the Midlands just through that heritage. And then through football, bounced around quite a lot. I sort of tend to say to people, think of Messi and Ronaldo and don't think of me, and that usually sets your expectations in the right place. I had a good career and played actually in every level of English football. So I played in the Premier League, the second division, the third division, the fourth division, and the fifth division.
Yeah.
So I've sort of understood all levels, but I bounced around a lot through that career and lived in different places. And then in 2024, September last year, I moved to LA to go on this next chapter and start to try and kind of build Hylo's mission over here.
Gotcha. And so what team did you play with in the Premier League? So I'm not, just full disclosure, I am not a football fan. I appreciate the sport. I could see myself getting into it if I had more time. I'm mostly a very hardcore baseball fan in the US.
Okay.
That's kind of my sport. So yeah, but I think I have some familiarity with the teams, and if people actually know you or know, they're probably like rolling their eyes at me. But what team did you play for?
I doubt anyone would have known me, but I played for QPR,
Okay.
which is their sort of the abbreviation of the opposite of the abbreviation is Queens Park Rangers. So they're a team in West London. I would say you don't really have a pyramid system here where teams get relegated and promoted, but if you did, we would be like a team that like probably every 5 seasons makes it into the Premier League and then drops down and then goes back up. It's a bit of more of a yo-yo type club, I would say.
Gotcha.
But when I was coming through as a young player in 2012, we had this incredibly wealthy owner who was like signing these very like well-known kind of elite players. So the context of the club was quite different to how it is now. But that was quite an amazing experience because you had elite England internationals in our locker room as a young player that you could sort of learn from and feed off. But it also made it more difficult to make an impact, basically. So it's interesting. I don't mind baseball as an aside because it's quite like cricket and it's quite like a meditative sport to watch, and I quite like that sort of sport. But the only baseball game I actually went to, Robbe, was a no-hitter for the Mets, a guy called Santana. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it was quite funny.
Was it Johan Santana? I would think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
But I sort of sat there, and it wasn't, I think, the new version of baseball that's slightly kind of faster in terms of its gameplay. So it was like, a good 4 or 5 hours of nobody hitting or doing anything. And the crowd was going mental, and I just didn't understand it because I was like, no one's doing anything.
That's actually amazing. That's the best thing I've ever heard.
And everyone was going mental, and they were going like having so much fun, and I was like, this is bizarre. Nobody's hit the
ball. And you didn't realize you're at one of the best games you could ever be at. That's incredible.
Yeah. It was incredible, but slightly boring, I have to say.
Yeah, that's true. I get that. But also you're in Los Angeles now, so there's no better time to be a baseball fan.
I know, exactly.
You get to see arguably the greatest athlete, one of the greatest athletes to ever live,
incredible,
playing in Los Angeles.
Yeah. Somebody explained to me the other day that actually I think he hit like 55 home runs or something. And obviously he's a pitcher, which is very rare. But then they said, like, back in the day, a great hitter would hit like 3 home runs.
There was still some home run hitters. I mean, obviously Babe Ruth had the record for a long time, but it was more. It was a little bit different. Yeah, there's definitely more power involved today. But the fact that you're doing it against people who are throwing, like, you have all the data in the world to see your competition, and then you can still manage to do that against people throwing 96 miles an hour. It's pretty amazing.
Incredible.
Anyways, all right, sweet. I always like trying to sneak in baseball talk to this podcast, so mission accomplished. All right, so tell me about Hylo and how you got started with that, because obviously you had your football career. So what was the transition from that to starting a shoe brand of all things? And we already said it was hard and difficult, and I know from other people we talk to who have also started their own shoe companies, like there's a lot that goes into it. It's not like making a shirt where you're like, oh, let's cut this fabric, small, medium, large, done. There is so much that goes into it, especially when we're talking half sizes and lasts and molds and everything else. So when you went into this, was it pretty much zero, like, oh, I have this idea, let's just go for it?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say pretty much. The idea of the idea of like an aglet or a mold or all of these like nuanced like kind of niche bits of information were completely foreign to me. Like one of my best friends through childhood, who's now one of my co-founders at Hylo. He's like a quite an interesting. He'd be great on the pod one day. He's sort of a very kind of interesting, kind of curious person, I would say.
Okay.
And he's like very bright. He went to Cambridge in the UK, which is like one of the top schools, and
Yeah.
and I would be in this football bubble and world where we wouldn't really necessarily like discuss like bigger topics necessarily, other than like what's happening on Netflix or who played well at the weekend. So I would like kind of periodically speak to Jacob just about like what was going on in the real world, and trying to get some context from him. And one day he sort of called me up after a run in London in a park, and his sort of shoes were basically dead, which it was also something that I didn't really quite understand at the time. I think this sort of awareness that shoes have a compromise point is obviously now something that feels very obvious, especially to all of us in the industry. But like I didn't really understand that was something that happened.
I feel like if you're not into running, maybe just running, there's so many. I mean, I used to just take my shoes till when the outsole fell off, right? Or when the midsole
there's a
came
hole,
apart.
or like there's a hole appeared. It was almost just like the point of no return, where you actually would get wet on your feet or you slip.
Yeah,
and I see that in running stores all the time now, where people come in and they're like almost disappointed in the durability of the product, and it's like a 5-year-old model. Right. I'm like, wow, you got like 10 million miles out of this. You should be stoked. Anyway, so he had called me up, and I was like, okay. And he just was like, what am I going to do with these shoes? I'm going to just like throw them away, basically. Is kind of. And he was like, he's interested in, I guess, how kind of products interact with our experience, and then like the context of those products in like a societal point of view, I guess, would be like the summary of Jacob. And we had this like, he kind of asked me as an athlete, what brands do I like, basically. And I was at the time like in my very small, just to put a caveat in, my very small platform, like talking about like nature and the environment, and I've always been really passionate about like the outdoors. So in sort of a few club interviews, I was pushing the team to be a little bit more proactive on their sustainability, etc., etc. So he was like, how do you think about this sort of like end of life, and I guess footwear or sporting goods industry was probably more of the context. And we just like played around with this discussion for like quite a few days, really, about like what were the brands that I really liked and got inspired by and excited by. And like this isn't me. Sorry, go on.
Oh, and I was going to say, so for that example, what brands would those be? At that time, what was something that excited you or that you looked to?
Well, I always like enjoyed the sporting side of the brands and like the stories, these iconic moments that athletes were associated with that inspire all of us, right? But I was like looking, I was probably a little bit more of like a Patagonia or North Face type of customer in my sort of like off-field stuff. I was into more of like kind of the nature documentaries and the surf documentaries, and I was
Gotcha.
kind of more into that outdoorsy kind of vibe. So it's not to say I really like dislike the brands that I was working with as a footballer, but I just didn't feel they quite like met me at where I was. And then it just sparked this discussion like at the time, which was like, what happened if we applied, kind of more environmental focus and storytelling and advocacy to also high performance. And it was like, now knowing what I know and knowing the challenges of building that, it was a very vision led conversation. And
Yeah.
it was like, why hasn't somebody done this? It seems like super obvious, like there's not and actually 5-6 years ago, there wasn't such conversation around sustainability in the context of products. So I think now it's a slightly different situation, but at the time it felt like quite an obvious but also very underserved topic.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think, I would say around 5 or 6 years ago is when it was started to definitely make, it was part of the story that a lot of brands were using then, starting to come into the sustainability aspect of things. But yeah, obviously that does create its own challenges for sure. If you're just, it's much different than taking a sheet or a puck of, plastic or whatever, basically TPE or whatever, and then it's injecting it with air. Or EVA. But so from that point, so you had the idea for, okay, we want to make sustainable footwear. Was this running at the time? Was it running focused or was it lifestyle, or what were you thinking at the time?
Well, technically we didn't even like just at that conversation, like zone in on footwear. We were just like,
Okay.
It was more like, a sports brand basically.
Gotcha. Right.
And then when we like took the next stage of the discussion a bit further and was like, well, like if we're going to actually build this and it's, going to be impactful, like, I think you mentioned it in the first part of the conversation. It's like, apparel necessarily, not to say it's easy, but it's not quite the same kind of impact in terms of life cycle and and it's not also the same barriers to entry. It's like, it's kind of, I would say, widely accepted that it's easier to make a t-shirt than it is a shoe. So we kind of then worked off that and went, oh, well, this seems like the hardest thing we could do. Let's kind of shoot kind of after that. And then, obviously we then kind of narrowed down a bit more into running. But I think the first couple of years of the company, when in 2020 to 2022, the biggest issue we had was almost that journey, that we had kind of like not specified a really clear product kind of brief of what we were trying to achieve. And we sort of said, okay, a running shoe that we want to be more sustainable, and it was okay, but it wasn't, making you want to run like the world depends on it, and it didn't have the dialed performance requirements that a runner would expect to truly be like a formidable running shoe. And I think, we went through a big journey of learning about materialization, about the practicalities of sustainability, around supply chain, around like product at large. And I think in 2023, we had this kind of quite big reset where we had to just like rebuild the product strategy and go back to basics and take all of those learnings from the first few years and try and kind of pivot essentially. So we kind of internally talk about 2023, 2024 about kind of the start of the company.
Okay.
Because like 2020 to 2022/2023, we were sort of figuring so much out and just, making a lot of mistakes, I would say.
Yeah, because I personally didn't, but I think Megan and maybe Thomas tested the first shoe, which was the Impact, or was it the...
Which is still our sort of kind of model, basically, that we pivoted into.
But it was the essentially launch model of that shoe. And I think there were some I don't know if it was the most favorable review. I'll be honest, because I think what you said, like it was your first shoe, you're figuring stuff out. There's clearly some stuff probably to be figured out. If you want it, I think it was like a comfortable shoe, looked good, but it was more of a, if you're running a more performance, what runners are looking for, probably need to make some improvements. Which it's so that's what you're saying. That kind of went from that to where you are now as this new phase of Hylo being kind of the more official launch of the brand.
Yeah, I think, listen, with Impact One, it's definitely got and had some good traction in terms of, the running community. I think, in terms of like responsiveness and comfort and kind of overall experience and geometry and all these things that go into it, like we've had strong feedback, and it's enabled us to build a platform. But we definitely feel like we're at sort of the beginning of the journey and not at the end, as you'd hope. And into 2026, we have a couple of new models coming out, one of which is an update to the Impact as well, which takes a lot of those learnings as well from our first sort of 18 months to 2 years in market. So, I think we definitely, like most small, young startup challenger businesses, is like the rate of learning far outseeds sometimes or supersedes your rate of change. You'd love to move faster, but in footwear it just takes time for all of these processes and learnings to come through.
So that's I guess I was going to ask, what has been, looking back at the last couple years, what has been the most challenging thing? Because first off, you started in kind of the worst time in the history of humanity for making products overseas and getting them shipped to your country, because the logistical hurdles and production, everything during COVID was just a disaster for a lot of people. So I'm sure you had to work through that. Was that the most difficult part? Or like, what were some of the really difficult things that you encountered in the first couple years, especially?
Yeah, I think, broadly speaking, everything's been so hard. I just have to be like really honest about that. So it's like I'm just attrition to hardness now to some degree. But I think like at the beginning it was like, we had this philosophy around sustainability, but then there was just like, what does that actually mean? Like, what is the context of that? Like, it's I think it's a very thrown around subject now, and it can feel disingenuous at times with just a broad stroke. And it's actually,
for sure,
it needs to be as objective as you can be within the information that you have, and trying to apply that into a strategy. So like learning, I wasn't like a scientist, right? So I'm like learning on the job through that process. But then also like the pragmatism of how that strategy also relates to like the performance, because if it was easy and we could like make shoes out of like the soil that were I think that probably would have been done, right? So it's kind of like that journey of like learning about how performance and sustainability and then obviously design coexist together has been like, I wouldn't say like exceptionally hard necessarily. It's been really fun and rewarding, but we've had to adapt a lot,
right?
And I think also, in terms of just like sheer like practicality of this business, it's like, getting one shoe off the ground, when you think into like when you put into context, like finding a supplier who's willing to give you a chance, who's got like an innovation department that's like going to work with you collaboratively and can see the journey you're building. Because I think some people may or may not know this, but pretty much all footwear is third-party manufactured. It's not like car industry where it's vertically integrated. Right. So even though like Nike say like Nike are working with their own manufacturing partners, so trying to get an amazing partner is challenging, and then funding all of that.
And even that, a lot of the brands even use the same factory, so it's they'll be working within the same processing facility or manufacturing facility, making, and they'll have access to these different technologies and different injections and stuff. But then you also like, you can't just walk in and be like, hey, can I start using this line? It's like you have You have to
Exactly.
find you either have to find a smaller manufacturer or someone else who's willing to work with you. And then it's like, are you going to have access to the best foaming technologies or the most, if you're sustainable, the best sustainable, so I can imagine there's so many things that go into that for sure. And then when you're so when you brought us something, you said sustainability, it is this blanket term. I think that's something that I struggle with, is that and honestly, probably a lot of consumers struggle with at this point, is you see sustainability slapped onto pretty much everything, right? So it could be, shoes to apparel to, you hear sustainability about, anything, cigarettes, whatever. I feel like everything is sustainable, right? It's like American spirits are sustainable, I guess. So what does that mean for Hylo? Because I think it means a lot of different things for different brands. And a lot of people just write it off at this point because it's hard to even figure out what it means. So how do you define that for your brand?
Yeah, so I think if you think about our name, Hylo, high performance, low impact, I actually don't particularly enjoy the word sustainability personally. I think it's a good thing because most people broadly understand what it is, and it's kind of like a bit of a movement, I would say, to some degree. But in terms of the actual literal meaning of the word, shoes aren't kind of regenerative. They're not regenerating spontaneously, right? So the idea that a shoe is sustainable in kind of in some way is a little bit of a kind of an oxymoron, I guess, to some degree.
Yeah.
And actually, the context should be around the impact, and what is that as objectively as possible that you can kind of explain. And that's kind of our thought stream about Hylo, is like, how do you make the highest performing product you can in the context of the lowest impact? Because also what we've learned is that the least sustainable thing you can do, or the highest impact thing you could do from a negative point of view, is actually make a product that nobody wants, because inventory and all of these shoes out there in the world, there's a very strong case to make that the world doesn't need another shoe. So if you can't qualify that in the performance and objectify it in the impact, what are you really doing? And I think for us, I'm always pushing the team, and we as a team are always trying to benchmark and just say how do we actually calculate the impact of this product? And a lot of the time we leverage life cycle assessments. So we look at the carbon intensity of the product. So we have, a model that we put in kind of data points to, and it's kind of independently verified, that tells us, to the best of our knowledge and the best of the data that we have, this is the carbon per pair of a shoe. And you might have seen that on an ASICS model where they write it, right?
I was going to say that's the one. Yeah, the ASICS does that, right?
Exactly. So, I think us and ASICS, to my knowledge, and there might be other brands, so I apologize, but we're the ones who are kind of communicating that number externally versus just knowing it internally. And then we try and benchmark that as much as we can to say, okay, is this measurably lower? And can we be at peace that we've made a product here that hits the performance mandate that the brief is, and then has a better or lower impact than the peer group? And I think we're not going to have I don't think it's going to be binary cars in footwear, where overnight there's just this kind of electric kind of car that just appears.
Right.
I think it's going to be an kind of what might feel like a slow move, but over 5 or 10 years, a real shift in material innovation. And you're already seeing it amongst some of the other brands that there's some really cool materials that are coming in. But critically, they have to perform.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the key, is that in the past, especially, I think we've experienced some sustainable midsoles or sugarcane based or castor bean based midsoles that are pretty mediocre. So I know Allbirds had some shoes that were okay, but not great. And then I think is it Veja or Veja? I always forget.
Yeah. Both.
Their first Condor was like really awful. It was basically like a rock, so that was a terrible shoe. Although I did like their last version, but I feel like they're one of the few, not to like sing the praises of one of your competitors, but I feel like they are actually one of the very few shoe brands that are sustainable in pretty much. They're very I would say intentional about the whole chain of what they do from start to finish. And I think they do a really good job. And I'm sure you've even looked at what they've done, because I do think they are a pretty good example of that in the industry.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the way that they conduct their supply chain and the transparency and what they've done there on a material perspective is amazing. And like I'm always like, very clear that we're not perfect at Hylo. I'm not here sitting saying we have solved sustainability and ultimately everybody should take the lead off us. We're quite pragmatic and open about our challenges.
Yeah.
But our intentionality is there. But also, I think over the past 4 or 5 years, I've also just really fallen in love with running and movement as as this other parallel, I guess. I think sometimes when you get laser focused on sustainability as just like one aspect of
Right.
a brand's kind of story or USP, I think it can almost sometimes devalue the idea that like running is bad on the other side of this fence, and like that is not true. That is not true at all. There's far worse industries in the world that don't create
Right.
like running, irrespective of how the products are made, is just like an amazing vehicle for change. So
Right.
like I'm just like I'm super excited to be a brand in that space, and I almost kind of want Hylo not to be known as like this niche sustainability kind of company that's trying
Sure.
to just like kind of sit out here and be preachy, because that's not who we are. But it's also
Yeah.
not also the entirety of our motivation. Like we want to be a global running brand and be
Right.
part of that running movement.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good. I like that, because there's a balance between the two. I think it's like what you said. You can make something that's ultra sustainable, top to bottom, whatever. But if it's a shit product, then nobody's gonna want to want to run in it. So what's the point of making it? Now you have all these shoes, and so it's like, yeah, balancing that, striking that balance between
Pendulum.
the performance, the sustainability, and even the design, making it this beautiful shoe people want to run in, that integrate into their life and be part of the story. I think is exactly. I think there's just a balance to be made there.
Yeah, for sure. And like, we've actually been talking about this quite a lot internally. It's like when we started, hate to sound like some sort of startup, founder who likes a Venn diagram, but like, if you were to ask me like what is going to be like Hylo's kind of values or value proposition to people, I would have said like sustainability and performance, and but performance was definitely like secondary within that context. And now I think there's 3 pillars to what we do, like, and one of them has definitely appeared as we've been in market, has been design. People
Yeah.
really like the way our shoes look, and they feedback that to us all the time. Performance and sustainability or impact as those 3. And I think the critical thing for me is like those 3 have to all equally coexist in a authentic and tangible and measurable way to actually have a product that people want. And
Yeah.
if you, and obviously price kind of comes into that as well. If you're doing it for 7 times the price of everyone else, then probably that's not the best opportunity or value proposition to customers. But yeah, I definitely think for us, we're not here trying to bash like brands, or we're not here trying to say we have figured it out. You have to play at all of those 3, and I think quite a lot of companies are trying to do that, but they just have different weightings.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think those are 3 super important components to the product. And like you said, especially design, like there's plenty of brands who have made good performance shoes that have just look horrible. I'm talking about Skechers in particular. In particular, like their shoes have always been so good. Like they actually did had a lot of technologies before the bigger brands did. Like they were one of the first to do supercritical foams. They nitrogen infused midsoles. They were just really performance wise pretty solid, but the design was god awful. So I would be embarrassed to run in them at any point in my entire life. Dark, light, doesn't even matter. And so it's just like I can't get on board with that. Like I can't tell somebody about it. I mean, I told people it's a good value. So they had good value too. They were like 120, 130 bucks. It's good value, good performance. So they had two of those pillars. But the design was just so bad. It's really hard to make. Some people don't care about that at all. But I think if we're being honest, if you're dropping 150 at this point, 150 to $200 on a shoe, you probably want it to look good in some capacity.
Yeah, I think, listen, as well, just to expand on that, it's like, I think we are all to some degree aesthetic beings. Whether it's the coffee mug you like to drink out of, or the t-shirt you put on, or the shoe, like all of these things like matter, right? And to kind of almost leave that as not like an important part of is not being honest with yourself. And then I think, ultimately, the kind of the way that you apply design is also quite subjective, right? Like to somebody, a bright yellow shoe is like
true.
the most awesome design ever. And so I think there are just like nuances within that design kind of philosophy that, we try and understand to be our brand and not somebody else's brand. And I think, that's something I think you'll see from us over the next 2 or 3 years. It's quite hard to kind of explain with one model, but when you've got like 5 or 6 models and you can see that design philosophy play out, I think, we have got something interesting or an interesting point of view there, especially with the way that running shoes are being consumed. Like, it's now like for your runs, but also for going to work, for going to the coffee shop, for doing everything, because suits kind of don't exist anymore.
Yeah, that's kind of what that's what I've been saying. There are some people who say, "Oh, I just want running shoes. Why do I care what they look like?" And I'm like, yeah, but if you could have both, wouldn't you want both? Like if you could wear something with normal clothing that looks great and then also run in them, wouldn't that be the ideal situation? I feel like, because then even if you lose the life out of the shoe in the running side, you can wear them afterwards until they completely fall apart or whatever. I just feel like that's, and then some people just don't care. Like you said, if they're a neon yellow Saucony, they'll wear them with, they'll wear them to church and they'll wear them on the run. I don't know.
I think as well, like some people, I spend a lot of time in run specialty stores. Like that's a big part of my work. And I actually fit a lot of customers. And the amount of people that have this like, it's like, it's almost quite funny because a lot of the time they tell me they're like, they run 3 times a week, but they sort of premise the discussion with, I'm not a runner, I think a lot of people like sort of struggle with that, dialogue with themselves of like addressing the fact that they are a runner, but also B, that like walking to me is part of running. Like it's just a different tempo. So like if you're walking, like you're still a runner, but you are just doing it at a much lower intensity. And a running shoe isn't strictly solely defined for running. Like most people are wearing them for walking. So that when you think about it in that context, like design is fundamentally very important because it transcends just the experience of, zone 2 or zone 3 and upwards running, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, some of my favorite like there's shoes that I'm not going to wear to walk in, like carbon plated, fast day, race day shoes, which are super fun and fantastic and everything. But I love a shoe that you can run in and then throw on with a pair of jeans. It feels great, I like, or even casually, I love wearing shoes like the New Balance 1080. I wish I could run in them. That would be pretty awesome. I guess you could.
Why can't
technically?
You? Why can't you? Just
what's that?
Why can't you?
You could. It technically has fuel cell, but I would say it's a different variation on fuel cell than what's in their actual performance shoes. It's pretty heavy and like a more like suede upper. So there, although I will say there is someone that we know, I think, who works at New Balance. Yeah, I forget her name. But she has run many marathons in the 1080. So who am I to say? But I guess you could, but I feel like there's performance wise, it doesn't have that. You could run in it maybe in the year 1998 or something, but I would say like right now, not the best option. Not when you have everything else out there.
It's incredible what's happening in the category and how much,
Yeah.
like innovation is coming through and the optionality.
Well,
It's
even
amazing.
since you started, I feel like things have changed dramatically. I mean, or even when you first had the idea to start the brand, 5 or 6 years ago, the way that foams have, everyone's caught up now to where everybody's just using crazy, like it's hard to give a bad review to a shoe at this point because the foams are so good that you can pretty much just put in a midsole and then throw on a decent breathable upper, and it's gonna be like, honestly, it's gonna be okay. It's very hard to make a bad shoe, I feel like, anymore. I mean, you might say otherwise, but I'm sure it's harder than it looks, especially if you want to make a really good shoe. But I think even if you just want to make just from nothing, like I remember a couple years ago, it was like Noble sent us, they're known for their gym shoes or like CrossFit shoes and stuff. They sent us a shoe that was a Piba midsole and basically a mesh upper. No overlays, no nothing, no structure, just Piba. And like it was fine. It wasn't a good shoe because the upper was horrible. Like your foot moved all over the place, but the ride was fine because it was just a slab of Piba foam. Yeah, so I feel like at this point, like you said, I'm sure you've seen things, or like I said, I think you've seen things change a lot in the foam department where it's kind of exciting, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. I think it kind of brings us back to that kind of like those core sort of pillars, and it's like if performance, the margins are getting smaller and smaller, then I do think it kind of, design and the kind of the overall kind of, I guess, impact technology within the product becomes an even greater kind of lever that you have to try and innovate on. And then obviously, like, brand, your brand has to appeal and be compelling and tell great stories and get people excited, right? And I think
Yeah.
in a way it's amazing for runners, the kind of the technological innovation, because now you can really kind of trust a different plethora of products to provide a good experience. So then it becomes much more, I think, nuanced in like why a customer chooses a product, and that's fun on like my side of the fence, because it's like, why does that, like, what is it about that like that relates to somebody? If the performance is all pretty good, like, what is it about that brand,
Sure.
and even the way that the product is portrayed? How do you how do you innovate at that level as well? Because again, that's not me like using waffly, that's how we are as humans. It's like, that's how I was as an athlete. I used to remember training as a 7-year-old, pretending to be like the athletes that I loved.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I'm this player, and like, what is it about me that wants to do that? And all of us want to do it in some way, shape, or form. We're all sort of like,
Yeah.
looking outward and inward constantly. So I think that's like a really fun, like, interesting, never-ending problem that becomes even more important in the age of innovation.
Well, right, because you want to stay ahead of the trend, or you want to be that's the next thing, or that people want on their feet. And you have to be pretty intentional to tap into that, and do it in a way that's authentic too, which is the most important thing. Because if you just try to throw something out there, and that's like, people know when you're being inauthentic, and I feel like that's a huge part of the story, and one of those intangible things that's kind of hard to nail down.
For sure. And I think that's the big, honestly, speaking about, maybe I wouldn't necessarily call it a challenge, but probably one of the biggest learnings I've had on this journey is
Mm-hmm.
around that like tunnel vision, of who are you. It's like quite an existential piece, but when you're building a company and a brand, you obviously have to be aware of the dynamics that are around you, right? Like these technologies. Like if somebody finds a great midsole, compound, then like for sure, you'd be an idiot not to investigate, right?
Right, right.
But beyond those sort of like comparables, it's like who are you and who are you, like who are you authentically trying to be, and
Mm-hmm.
and how do you stay true to that? Because you know you guys are, a shoe reviewers, you see everything in the marketplace, and
Mm-hmm.
if obviously we're not going to be impervious to that feedback. We have to take in all of that feedback, but also we
Mm-hmm.
need to present ourselves as we are, not trying to be a snapshot of some other brand multiplied by a snapshot of some other brand multiplied.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I try and instill in us, is this like focus on who we are, and like we're not
Mm-hmm.
going to be everything to everyone, and that might at times lead to less opportunities. But I think over 10-20 years, like doing it your way and being who you are and just being the company that authentically feels right, I
Yeah.
think is the only way to truly have longevity in this space.
Yeah, I agree with you. No, it's especially now, I think as things get more inauthentic, uh, with AI and just technology, and no one knows what's real or what isn't. I feel like that authenticity part is even carries more currency, to people who want real storytelling or just brands that mean something and have authentic, purpose behind them, I guess.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's kind of the reason why I came off kind of social media and mainly Instagram. And it's not to say it's not an amazing platform, but you know, I found it. It's very hard to have true, authentic ideas,
Yeah.
and not to feel, in some way, shape, or form, I would say, corrupted by the information that's out there.
Yeah.
And so, like for me, a few months back, I was just like, this isn't, I don't think, serving like my process, or how this tunnel vision that I'm trying to create. And I
Yeah.
think it's hard to do that now in this kind of age, like without sort of saying, or, making that normal kind of reference on like social media and stuff. But there's so much content and so much information, that how do you draw the line of what is like uniquely yours and not, and
That's an
being authentic.
interesting. I never really considered that. But I like that perspective. Is that, yeah, if you're consuming so much information and influence, especially when the algorithm's dialed into exactly what they think you want, it's not like you're going to a library and exploring the book stacks. It's like they're bringing the information to you that they want you to see. And it's like, so then when I'm thinking, are my thoughts original thoughts, or are they being, if I'm spending 2 hours a day on social media, is it an amalgam of all those thoughts? Like, is that what I'm producing, And which is actually crazy to think about. I've never really considered it from that perspective. Like, I know it's like, obviously you're influenced by what you see on social media and just media in general. But the fact that, like, if you think you're having original ideas and then it turns out like maybe it's not so original, that is a terrifying thought to think about.
Well, I think in some way, shape, or form, like all ideas and all creative is like a amalgamation of our experience. But I do think it can be more difficult to lean into the true kind of, not innovation or true authenticity of what you're trying to say, when you are constantly consuming things. And I think also in a business like shoes, where it takes a long time to establish processes and product and innovate, and also then some consumer like businesses like have a product launch every week.
Yeah.
In footwear, you get 2 or 3 a year maybe, basically. And
Hmm.
actually it does lend itself to kind of like doing less but doing better. And I'm obviously, like, we exist on social media. It's an incredibly important part of
Sure.
how we all live now. But I think when it comes to like trying to tunnel vision yourself, it can be more challenging.
Have you been able to focus more or feel like you've been able to, I don't know, have more original thoughts or just be more in tune with your own thoughts now that you've taken a break from social media?
I think I've stopped considering myself as a brand, which I think is like, yeah, like just from like a kind of an, not to get too kind of philosophical, but from like an egoic point of view, like I didn't
Yeah.
like the comparative element that would get naturally stoked in me because of how the platform works. And
Mm-hmm.
and also I got two kids and I've got a third coming on the way, and I'm trying to build a company. I don't have much time, and I
Yeah.
think the addictive, or I want to make my time feel really valuable and present. And this is maybe just my experience, but I or my heightened experience, but I have quite an obsessive personality, right? Like, I'm a football player who's building a running shoe company, so I can get pretty into things, right? And I
Yeah.
felt that, the way that the algorithm and the platform interacts with you was just really difficult for me to like not think about. So like if I posted something, it wouldn't just be that and
Yeah.
done. It drags you
Yeah.
in. It's this like
Dude,
thing on your shoulder
no, I
that's
know
like,
exactly the feeling.
I'm there with my kids on a Saturday, and I'm wanting to be fully present for them because I've had a busy week, and like something is in my ear, like,
Right? It feels like a mosquito in your ear. Like
and it's like pulling me towards my phone, and I'm like,
yeah,
what are you doing, dude? Like, you've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. Like, these people need you. They're clawing at you. Just be here
I
with them.
know. Yeah, I think that's the worst. One of the worst parts about it too is that, and like, I'll be honest, I've gone through phases where I'm in and out of social media, and I'm want to quit it, and then kind of do, and then come back, and then it's like wasting so much time. I feel like I'm on a phase right now where I waste too much time on it. So it's like I've been struggling with the same thoughts where it's like it's not even just being on it. It's like you said, even when you're not on it, there's like a lingering thing that's like implanted in your brain that feels like it's still on. Because it's like you said, like even if you don't post something yourself, or you're still just thinking about like these random things and content, it kind of becomes your reality in a way, because then you also talk about it with other people, which is like very weird. I hate when that even comes up in conversation, because it shouldn't even be part of conversation at all. Like, but I found
I also
myself
think,
doing,
go
yeah.
on.
No, that's basically, I just found myself like, even yesterday, I think I had mentioned, oh yeah, I saw this on Instagram or something. I'm like, why am I discussing this? This is stupid.
I think, listen, there is obviously like, for a lot of people, it's and Hylo is the same. It's how you get your message out there. It's a platform for access. I think the biggest, I guess, branding success of social media has been, it's been a connection platform. Like, to me, it's never been connective. It's been an access platform. You can access things. Like, I can
Yeah.
go on to Believe in the Run and see great information around shoes. And if I'm an independent consumer who wants to make an informed decision, like, what an amazing thing to go and review. But it's not like me and my mates having a good time. It's never going to replicate the in-person experience. And I'm
Right.
sure this is nice. This is way nicer than us texting this conversation. But like, if we're together, the difference
Yeah.
is even more tangible. And I think,
Sure.
just like, not forgetting that, I think that access is different to connection. And for me, that's just been kind of super important. And also,
Yeah.
like, nobody cares about me. Like, that's kind of a good thing for me. It's just like I don't want to be this like hero in my own movie, like, and this kind of, and I think social media creates this narrative where you're sort of
Yeah.
like Brad Pitt in your own movie. And that's, for me, just like, it's like, I don't want that to be my legacy in the world. I'd rather do things like that I feel
Right.
are slightly more purposeful.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, no, I know exactly what you're saying. about being and then everyone has main character syndrome and thinks everything is about them, and we wonder why.
But it creates this like, also dynamic where you can't help but compare yourself, and ultimately you're kind of somehow defined by that reach or that
Yeah.
perception. And I think it's just like probably a brand issue for social media. If it was more honest, that it's like a great access, I can learn about things and I can see things, and it's very visual, and there's some fun stories on there. Great. But the
Yeah.
idea that we're all connecting is just, I think, just complete
No,
nonsense.
at this point, that is far gone. Yeah, there's zero connection. But so yeah, when you're talking about your legacy and what you want to do, and so I imagine you think about that often, especially as you're spending time with this brand, with Hylo, and then like you said, you have 2 kids, and one on the way. I have 2 kids as well, and a little bit older, and then you do think about that a lot, like, oh man, is what I'm doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing? And is this all going to be worth it someday, especially in the position where you're in, where you've leveraged a lot, I'm sure, and and sacrificing either financially or time wise, which is even more valuable. I'm sure that is a daily thing that you probably think about.
Yeah, I do, and I think where I've arrived, and it does take quite a lot of running and thought to get there. Definitely, that's how I sort of use running as a way to process. But I do think certainly when you're building something, there can be this sort of I wouldn't call it narcissistic, but there can be this sort of self-indulgent narrative, which is I'm sacrificing and hustling and giving up all of this. And I felt that as a footballer, that was a very popular narrative, and I suffered with it. I really did. My whole career, it was you just gotta, you gotta suffer to succeed. It's outwork, out hustle.
Yeah.
And ultimately what I realized was you can still do great things and have a great life, and not be in this constant kind of self-punishment mindset where you're trying to just out suffer
Yeah.
everyone. And I nobody's forcing me to do Hylo. It's the biggest outside of my kids and my wife, it's the biggest privilege of my life to build this company and to be involved in movement, and to be involved in something that I really love and inspired by. So I try not to get too self-indulgent that I'm just out there out hustling everyone, and one day it's gonna I'm gonna be a made man, and I'm gonna be happy, because I just know it won't happen. And actually,
well, right, because that you'll get there, and then it'll be, wait, why am I not happy? Why do I have to chase the next thing?
Yeah, and we're doing honestly, it's not, I'm not trying to sound what's the word, self-righteous or self-modest, but
No,
we're having we're having a conversation around shoes, around a thing we both really enjoy. I'm going to leave this call. I'm going to go and talk about our campaign for our new shoe. I'm going to go for a run in an hour or two in some samples that we've got. It's effing it's bloody awesome.
For sure. Oh, absolutely.
And I always want to remember that, because otherwise, what are you doing? Just go do something else.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, it's definitely a pretty great spot to be in, to be able to be doing your passion, putting yourself into it, and then having the support of your friends and family, I think, is always just such a huge part of it, and that's awesome. Well, I do want to ask you, I don't want to keep you on too long, because I'm sure you also have important things to do, but so when we look to the future of Hylo, you mentioned you're going into this next phase of the brand and kind of building out a couple of different models. What's kind of your focus for the next year or two? Because obviously you're developing things for the 2 years out at this point.
Yeah, so into next year we've got 2 daily models coming out, essentially. So the way we think about I guess the kind of, certainly the road category is kind of I would say 3 big buckets, or 3 big buckets that are linked to intensity. So you've got sort of or sort of intensity meets, I guess, kind of running specificity. So we've got like easy or daily, you've got
Okay.
speed or tempo, and then you've got kind of race. And across those like buckets, we're making kind of franchises
Cool.
to try and sort of really focus ourselves. Like we're not, I'm fully aware now of like the importance of focus and just nailing a product brief. And into next year, I think the step change on innovation is quite dramatic. We've also onboarded like new supply chain because we've got more volume and more brand demand and stuff like that. So there's quite a big kind of I would say seismic shift for us from a product pipeline point of view. And then by 2028 we'll have, I think, 6 of 8 franchises out in market. So
Cool.
So there's quite a lot coming.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's exciting. Okay, so yeah, keep an eye out for that. What's your what's the release date in 2026 for the next shoe? Just
so we have two.
Guess,
We have 2 models that are kind of big updates. So Axis, which is our support shoe, coming out in February, 26th of February. So that's
Okay.
kind of for those more familiar with the running space, that's sort of spring summer, even though February is not
right.
it's not summer in my book. And then that's one big like innovation I want to change in the industry. It's like the idea that summer is February. And then in August we've got Impact 2, which is kind of the second update to our franchise. But that's not like just an upper change. That's like a full tooling, a full
for sure
ground up build.
Cool, that's awesome. And I want to give you a shout out for hiring Alex Arson, one of our friends from way back in the industry. He's probably one of my favorite people, not just in running, but in general. So I think you made the right. think you made the right choice in that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's also like, just to speak on that, Robbie, a little bit, is like we started like with 3 of us essentially trying to like kind of build this, and then in the last year, and what it's like, I mean, people, everything comes back to people, whether all of the innovation, all of the whatever you want to talk about, comes back to people. And like in the last year, we've really like pulled a team together, like Alex, one of like quite a few people that those in the industry I think really like know are like amazing humans, but also amazingly talented at what they do. So I think that's been a big part of our last 12 months.
Yeah, you will not find a harder worker than Alex. I know that for sure.
Exactly.
He's insane. Just be careful of whatever random presents he gives you. I can't guarantee that they're in any way.
The only bad thing about Alex is he's an Arsenal fan, but that's a football context. But
yeah, that should have been a non-starter for the job. Unfortunately, he probably didn't tell you that.
Yeah, exactly. He kept that a secret until we got the seat.
That's
cool.
Awesome. All right, well, Michael, it was great talking to you. I'm excited to see what's coming in 2026, and we'll put a link in the description for anyone else who wants to check out Hylo Athletics and their website and everything that you have right now. I'm sure we'll see you at some point in the near future. Are you going to be at the running event?
Yeah, we'll be there.
Yeah.
So come
right. So we'll see you there. And
we can connect. We don't have to
in actual real life. We don't have to do this thing. I'll make sure to get you guys. I can't remember if I have you scheduled or not. We'll get you on the schedule. We'll swing by. It'll be cool.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks, dude.
Yeah. All right. I'll talk to you later.
Good stretch, got my laces tied. My trusty podcast by my side. If you wanna talk